Chasing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon.
In August of 2022, I had the chance to visit California's Great America in Santa Clara, and it was really weird. Probably the most bizarre theme park visit of my life. You may have heard the news that California's Great America is set to close sometime in the next decade, as its operator Cedar Fair sold the land to a real estate developer in June of 2022, deciding to cash in on that valuable Silicon Valley land the park sits on to the tune of $310 million. Cedar Fair is currently leasing the land from that developer and is in the process of winding down the park for eventual closure. When the news broke that California's Great America would be closing, it pretty much leapfrogged to the very top of my bucket list parks. Foremost because I wanted to visit the park in its most authentic form possible, in case Cedar Fair decides to relocate any of its marquee attractions as part of this winding down process. But also because my home park is Six Flags Great America in Gurnee, Illinois, the sister park of California's Great America. The two Great America parks opened in 1976 as nearly identical clones of each other, and were really the first attempt to challenge the monopoly that Disney had built in the themed amusement space. Fun fact, a third Marriott's Great America was actually proposed for the Washington, D.C. area. Plans for this third park were subsequently canceled due to public opposition of the project, and instead, D.C. ended up with Six Flags America. So, really well done, guys. Sometime in the 1980s, the Marriott Corporation decided to unload their two parks, selling the Gurnee Park to Six Flags, which it's still owned and operated by today, and the California Park to the city of Santa Clara. The Santa Clara Park would be sold again to King's Entertainment in 1989, Paramount Parks in 1992, and finally to Cedar Fair in 2006. Needless to say, these two sister parks have taken completely different paths in their nearly 50 years of existence, with California's Great America having a much more messy and complicated history. So visiting CGA for the very first time and seeing all the similarities and differences to my own home park, which I know inside and out, was both strange and fascinating. At times, it felt like that part in Loki where all the different timelines begin to branch off, and I somehow ended up in this horrible alternate reality where American Eagle, Goliath, and Raging Bull don't exist. But I also appreciated the many unique aspects of the Santa Clara Park that don't exist at my home park. I ultimately left my visit to California's Great America with this kind of sad and bitter taste in my mouth, not only because of the park's rich history that we're set to lose, but also because of its wasted potential and the lost vision for what the park could have been. So this video is really going to serve two purposes. First, as a recap of my visit and a summary of my impressions of the park. And second, as an assessment of the sale of California's Great America, its closure, and the potential of the park that will sadly never be realized. I'll timestamp things for you guys if you want to jump around, but first, consider helping me out by hitting that like button and subscribing for more theme park content.
What a day, what a place, what a smile on your face. We're Marriott's Great America.
Before I give some of my overall thoughts on the park, let's kick things off with a lightning round on the 9 roller coasters of California's Great America. Starting off with Lucy's Krabby Cabbies, the park's E&F Miler Kiddie Coaster. Yes, I wrote it. Moving on. Woodstock Express is the Intamin Children's Coaster, which looks about as close to a homemade backyard coaster as I've ever seen at a major park. Psycho Mouse is an Aero Wild Mouse, and as you probably could have imagined, they run about one car at a time. These rides are fun, but rarely worth the wait. Grizzly is the park's double out and back wooden coaster, and I liked it. It's on the tamer side, but it runs smooth and has some good pops of air. Demon is an Aero Looper, which is the only Marriott era coaster that still exists at both Great America parks today, except California's version still has the original design on the front of the train, so bonus points to CGA. Patriot is the former Bolliger and Mabillard stand-up coaster, which has since been converted to a floorless coaster. This was the second ever roller coaster built by B&M, and it's sort of funny that the company's first 2 roller coasters both ended up at Great America parks. And this is far from the last post-Marriott era parallel between the two parks that we'll see. Patriot has this really interesting compact layout that's way different than than modern floorless coasters. And this ride was so fun, it honestly made a part of me wish that my Great America would have given Iron Wolf the same floorless treatment. Flight Deck is the custom layout B&M invert, and it's really good. It's got crazy pacing, great positive G's, along with some rare floater airtime. And of course, that incredible helix finale over the water that sends pins to your toes. Again, very weirdly, this was the second ever B&M invert after Batman the Ride at Six Flags Great America, and it runs just as intense as the original. Gold Striker is the park's GCI wooden coaster, and people rave about this ride, but for me, it didn't really match my expectations. It has some great twisting airtime and laterals, but I found it to be overly rough in a few spots, which took away from the overall ride experience. Don't get me wrong, it's still a very good wooden coaster, but I don't think I would place it in that upper echelon of GCIs. Railblazer, the RMC single rail and the newest roller coaster in the park, was my clear-cut favorite. Railblazer has out-of-control pacing, great ejector airtime, and somehow manages to pull off these graceful feeling elements despite the ride throwing you around like you're in a car wreck. It's also one of the most visually striking coasters in the Cedar Fair chain. The bright orange really pops, and the rockwork makes what's, on its own, a very bizarre-looking coaster fit in a lot more naturally. I'm a huge fan of this ride, and it seems like it may be the park's only viable roller coaster candidate for relocation. I was only in Northern California for a long weekend, so my visit to CGA came on a Saturday. And it was still early August during peak season, so as you can imagine, the park was slammed. A little pro tip for you guys, I visited Gilroy Gardens the day before, so I just bought a 2023 California's Great America Platinum Pass online beforehand, and it ended up working for admission into Gilroy Gardens as well. Now I can't promise that this is going to work in the future, because Cedar Fair actually stopped operating Gilroy Gardens at the end of 2021, so I'm not really sure why it worked for me, but if you're visiting in 2023, it may be worth looking into. Also, my purchase of a 2023 Platinum Pass came with a free fast lane, which I ended up using on this visit and pretty much saved the day. With that being said, let's talk about the operations at California's Great America. Now, I really don't want this to be the focus of the video because the park is closing, but I won't sugarcoat it. The operations at CGA were the worst I've ever seen at a Cedar Fair park. I mentioned the nightmare at Psycho Mouse, but the poor operation spanned pretty much throughout the entire park. Both Flight Deck and Patriot were both running one train all day, and like I said, this was a Saturday during peak season. 5-minute dispatches on the coasters were a very common occurrence throughout the day. It was very ugly. From my perspective, the bad operations had less to do with staffing or maintenance, and more to do with, let's say, lack of effort. At some of the other parks in the Cedar Fair chain, you can kind of feel this sense of pride from the ride operators. That was not present here at all. But with the park's future being in this weird purgatory, I can't really say that I blame any of the ride operators, who did not seem too interested in making sure dispatches were timely. Anyways, let's move on to some of my overall thoughts about this park. California's Great America is a really naturally beautiful park. It's got great tree coverage just about everywhere, and it has this really cool setting with both Levi Stadium right next door and the mountains in the backdrop. CGA's Carousel Plaza in Hometown Square is way nicer than Gurney's. The Santa Clara Park removed their railroad in 1999 and knocked down the trestle, hill, and station building in between Hometown Square and the Carousel, really opening up this front area of the park, which has this great connective energy to it. I'd still rather have the railroad, but I really like what they did with this area. Their Rapids ride, which is apparently just named Rapids, is in the exact same location as Gurney's, and it may actually be the fastest Rapids ride in the world. I really like this covered walkway they have over in the county fair area. California's Great America still has the gondola lift that was an opening day attraction at both parks. If I could steal one thing from CGA for my Great America, besides Railblazer of course, it would be this. The Great America parks were designed as basically just a mile-long loop with no shortcuts in between, so having this as a way to get to the back of the park is so convenient. I ended up using it like 3 times. Plus the views are just spectacular. The very back of the park where Drop Tower and Grizzly are may actually be the ugliest theme park section I've ever seen. All the buildings are worn down, the rides just have the ugliest colors, and there's this creepy ass bear just sitting there for apparently no reason. It is truly bizarre. And this area is kind of a microcosm of how I feel about California's Great America as a whole. The park feels like this hodgepodge of attractions attractions that lacks any trace of cohesiveness or storytelling. When you're just walking around California's Great America, it's pretty much impossible to tell what themed section you're in. The park has clearly been absent of any planning or vision for years. There's random patches of grass with no landscaping. The water park is awkwardly located in the middle of the dry park and is surrounded by all this ugly empty space. And there's areas of the park that are just completely abandoned. Well, it turns out that after Railblazer was added in 2018, Cedar Fair actually had plans to revitalize an entire third of the park. The county fair area was going to become Redwood territory, a nod to Northern California's unique topography, and the Action Zone area was set to become Bicentennial Fair, a retro nostalgic overlay anchored by the Great American Revolution giant Ferris wheel and a new Giga Coaster. Needless to say, this development would have been a massive upgrade for this park, and almost definitely would have altered the trajectory of its fate. Just from what we know, it seems like this project would have been on par or even greater than the investment that Cedar Fair has poured into Carowinds over the past decade, which has transformed that park from the butt of the chain to a legitimate destination park in the southeast region. This project's plans were apparently derailed after Cedar Fair changed strategies following the outbreak of the C word. But if we're being honest here, the chain had long been flirting with the idea of cashing in on that highly sought after Silicon Valley land. And from a business perspective, it's hard to blame Cedar Fair for their decision to sell the park. A consequence of CGA's turbulent history, being passed from owner to owner over the years, was a lack of vision for the park, which is evident in it being the cluttered mess that it is today. Turning CGA back into a cohesive themed park experience would have been no small task. It would have been a several-year endeavor with a price tag likely exceeding $50 million. And when you have this massive offer on the table, it just wasn't practical. But it's really sad to think about what could have been had Cedar Fair seen through the vision for this park, especially after physically setting foot in it. One of the reasons why I give my Great America such a hard time on here is because once upon a time, it was a world-class themed park experience with immersive lands and rides, and I still like to see that potential in it. I saw the same thing at California's Great America. The building blocks of the meticulously planned and themed park it once was are still there. And the concepts of the bright future that CGA could have had aren't just pipe dreams. They physically exist. This was going to happen, which looking back only makes the sad reality of California's Great America's future even more painful to deal with. It's a very strange experience visiting a park for the first time, while also knowing that it's probably going to be the last. And when you add in the aspect of familiarity that comes with its connection to my own home park, it made this ordinary theme park visit almost an out-of-body experience. I can truly say that I've never had a stranger experience at a theme park. But walking out of California's Great America at the end of my visit, and looking over and seeing the Columbia Carousel all lit up, while hearing the original Marriott-era Carousel song playing in the background, I had this feeling of sadness rush over me, and I honestly got a little emotional. I had this moment of appreciation for my Great America and all the good times I've had there. That despite all of the dumb stuff that I love to complain about, I got to grow up with a pretty damn good amusement park. Not only that, but the thought of losing it completely has never once had to cross my mind. So if there's one thing that I took away from this visit, it's this. California's Great America is not a very good theme park, but I think that's a byproduct of its uncertain history rather than its lack of value or potential. There's one thing I do know for certain about California's Great America. This park deserved a much better fate than the one currently planned for it.